Right, everybody. Let's see. Where are we? So last week we were talking about accessing databases. Hello. Last week we were looking at accessing databases using various ASP.NET controls. Right. So we were dragging tables onto the page and generating grid views, and we saw that those components are fairly sophisticated, very powerful. That allows us to edit, delete, insert, and any which way manipulate the database. Right. With all the, it had several pre-programmed commands, SQL commands, right, to be able to insert, delete, update, right, all the CRUD operations. And we saw how we can have them work together. We saw how the grid view could work together with a details view, right? And we can configure them for all sorts of various operations. We also saw that we could style them to look somewhat what we wanted, right? To use a bootstrap look and feel, but it had its limitation, right? It had pre-compiled templates that they were using, either tables and rows and whatnot, and really the HTML that it generates, it's somewhat canned, right? And oftentimes it doesn't let you work with the actual HTML that you want to use, right? Sometimes it generates its own IDs, it generates its own a lot of code gets generated by the server. So today I wanted to look at a technique that would allow us to have more control over the HTML that gets generated, and just use a very minimal use of controls for the display, right? In the back end, instead of using the database controls that pre-canned database controls, I like to use free-form SQL that we can use to create all of the SQL commands that we would want, right? Unrestricted from the limitations or things that are imposed by these components, right? These components, force you to work in a particular workflow. But if we have full control of how we interact with the database, we can create more custom web applications. Okay, that doesn't mean that we're going to just litter our web pages with SQL everywhere, right? We do have to follow. It's good practice to follow a particular pattern on how to structure, where is it that you do the interaction with the database. And we're going to be using a design pattern called the data access object that enforces us to think about, how can we encapsulate, modularize, and reuse these database interactions through a well-defined API that we create ourselves, right? That lets us abstract the access of a database, even though we write the access of the database, but it allows us to extract it so that other parts of the application can reuse this modular, object-oriented way of interacting with the database. Okay, so let's talk about those two topics. Let's see. Let me create a couple of exercises here for 5610 experiments. Let's see. Let's create here a directory where we're going to work on today's experiments. Okay. So we'll call this 400 the data access objects. So before we go into the data access, let me introduce to you a component that will allow us to display the content with very minimal intrusion from the components, right? So let me introduce to you the repeater, right? Let me an item, a web form called the repeater. Notice that I'm creating a component from the add item, right, and then selecting web form from here. And that's something that we haven't been doing. We've gone straight to the first drop down and selected, give me a web form, everything embedded on the same page. But I just wanted to show you that there's another there's an additional aspect to when you create these ASPX pages, and it's through this add new item dialog. And here you're given the choice on whether you want to separate the code from either a page, right, or do you want it in a separate artifact, right, in a separate class file, right? So notice that here is checked off, place code in a separate file. Let me just check that just to show you. If you'll notice, what it does is that not only creates the ASPX, right, but it also creates a sister artifact here, right, a .cs that has exactly the same name as the page. Okay, and if I open it, you'll notice that there's this code in here, right? The C# code in here. This is sometimes referred to as the code behind file, right? That has some of the logic. This is somewhat the equivalent of the controller in our mean stack application, right? You have the controller. The controller somehow was connected to the view, right, through the scope, and anything you did to the scope, it happened to the view, right? Anything that happened to the view happened to the scope instead of the controller. So this is somewhat that, right? It has its own peculiarities and its own dialect, how to do things, but it's more or less the same idea, right? And you'll find this pattern in many other frameworks, right, that follow this idea of having the view and having a separate controller that is dedicated to that view. And here, notice that it generates an initial event handler for the page load, right? If you remember all of this, we used to put it inside of a script here, right? If you remember, we had an additional script tag in here, right? Whereas over here, notice that we don't have the script tag, and instead, at the top, the first part of the page, notice that it declares that there's a separate code file, right, that is associated to this page. And also notice that the way they talk to one another, the way they're related to one another, is that this one is through an inheritance relationship, right? Notice that this page inherits from this other class, right, from this other namespace, right, CS 5610 experiments, blah, 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 right? This happens to be the name of this class, okay? So this communication, there's a one-to-one relationship between these two, right? So more or less, whatever you declare here is available on the view. Whatever you declare on the view, it's available over here. There's a one-to-one connection through this, through what is called a double binding, right? So which is the same thing as in the mean stack, same thing, right? There was a double binding between variables that were declared in the pages, right, with the double brackets, right, double curly brackets, and on the scope, right. Now the binding over there was implicit, right. If there were listeners listening for changes in the model, right, if there was any change, either you typing on an input field, or you modifying something in the controller, there were listeners, right, that were listening for changes in these attributes, and it made sure that both were synchronized, right. Over here is somewhat the same. Right, but oftentimes you have to explicitly, especially if your data model is very complex, it's collections of data, and lots of data, you have to explicitly bind the data, right? Anyway, but it follows more or less the same design pattern. Now, these classes, they have the peculiarities that they're only associated with this page, okay? So anything you code in here, right? It's non-reusable. You can't reuse anything that you declare here, as opposed to like a regular class, right? If this were a regular class, it could be a reference to another class, right? I could do inheritance. I could do all sorts of reusability, right? Over here, this kind of like it's only associated to this page, right? So the only thing that this is useful for is to connect perhaps to the event handlers to the page. But any other logic should not live here, right? Any other data access or business logic should not live here. Only strictly if you want to link to event handlers with a button, right? And you want to listen to those things and trigger actions, right? But that other logic should live elsewhere, right? And we'll see how to do it in a minute. But I just wanted to present to you the code behind. And let's play around with this the next two lessons, next two lectures. Okay. All right. So let's look at the repeater. So up to this point, we had created a couple of databases here, right? We had created the one for this course, the 5610, and then we had created a couple of tables, course, enrollments, faculty, reviews, students, right? And we were playing around with one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, and mapping tables in the last couple of weeks. And the way we would interact with it is that we would either create a grid view or create a details view, or one of these components in the toolbox, right, under the data. All of these, you can configure data sources, right? Say, hey, go and connect to this database, right, using this connection string, and retrieve, and use these select statement or inserts or updates or whatnot, right, to go off and interact with the database, right? And these were, pre-compiled components that you can configure. But like any other component in any framework, you have to stick within the walled garden that they give you. And if you try to stray away from, if you want to go a little beyond what the framework or the particular component allows you to do, it starts working against you, right? So let's use a minimal. The simplest of these that I'd like to introduce today is the repeater, right? So the repeater is a very generic. All of these, some of these are already repeaters, like the grid view is already a repeater, right? But it's a very special kind of repeater, right? That it renders using table formatting, right? Table rows and whatnot, and then you can configure how to render it. So the repeater is a more generic kind of repeater, right? It's a very lightweight component that says, well, give me a collection, right? And I'm just going to iterate over it, right? You decide what to display. How do you want to render this? I'm not going to tell you. You just tell me, what do you want me to do? As I iterate, tell me the template that you want to use every time I iterate for each item, right? Very much like the ng repeat in mean, right? You embed, you put the ng repeat, and then you give it the HTML that you want to copy and paste over and over and over, right? And then within that repeat, you have access to the current object that you're repeating over, right? Same thing here. Right? The repeater is very much, the engine repeat is probably based off of the ideas of these server-side components, right? I mean, that's what Angular boasts. It says here's a client-side, all these client-side ideas, right? That we're copying from very well-established server-side solutions, right? That have been around for quite a while, right? They're very mature. And let's see what could we copy of those really good ideas and bring them over to the client side, right? So let's look at server side, right? So let's look at ng repeat. Let's put here h1 and not ng repeat. Sorry, repeater. So repeater, and let's drag the repeater in here. Toolbox, and I'm just going to put it in here. There it is. Okay. So there it is. So it gives it a basic name, and it says run at server. And in here, within the body of the repeater, you can configure. What do you want me to do? Give me a template. Give me HTML. Give me whatever you want me to render over and over as I iterate over a collection of data. Right. And so in here you have several alternatives. You can say, what do you want me to do right before I start iterating? What do you want me to put first, like a header? And then you can tell me, what do you want me to put at the end, right? And then what do you want me to do every time, for every instance that I'm iterating? So for instance, you can configure a header template. What HTML do you want right before I start iterating? Or I can put a footer. What do you want me to do at the very end after I'm done iterating? And then the item template allows you to configure, here's the HTML that I want as I iterate for every instance. Right? And then you can put something in between. It says, as I iterate, what do you want me to put in between? Maybe I want me to put like like a row, or you want to put like a HR or something like that, right? Or some kind of heading. You can separate. So anyway, so let's use the item template. Whatever you type in here, right? It's your business. Okay. Whatever HTML or text, it's plain text. As far as the repeater is concerned, this is plain text, right? And it will be rendered as is, right? Verbatim. So whatever we give it to iterate over, as it's iterate for every instance, it'll copy and paste this to the page. Now we need to be able to tell it, what do you want to iterate over, right? I need to give it, what do I get, that array or list or rows or what, right? Some collection. What is the data set? I need to give it a data set to iterate over. Okay? So let's do that. Let's do that from the code behind. What we could do in the code behind, it says, well, here's a list of objects that you can iterate over, right? And I'll feed in the data, and then you can iterate over that. All right, so we're going to say a list of something, right? What is that something? So that something can be anything, right? It can be anything that has a representation of an object class, of a class, right? That has attributes, right? That has setters and getters that can be read, public getters, right? So that the repeater can read the values of the attributes as it's iterating over the collection. Okay, so we need to create a list of something, right? So let's create a list of let's create an object, like a class, right? That we can populate this list of, right? So let's go into the app code. So here is where we would want to put any logic, any data model, right? Outside of these code behind, right? Because remember, anything we put in the code behind is not reusable, right? But anything that we put in app code, right? Those are classes that can be reused, right? They can inherit from each other. They're accessible across the framework. So let's put in here in CS5610. Let's put a movie here. Let's put a movie class. We'll call it movie. And let's this class, and let's put it in a namespace, and we'll call this what, edu.cs5610.dal. Look, namespaces allow you to organize your classes, right? So that if you have the same class, with the same name, right, they might mean different things in different contexts, right? And namespaces allows you to organize your code this way, right? So today, this movie is really the movie under the context edu, NEU, CS5610, and we're talking today about DAOs, okay? They're not exactly the same thing as packages in Java. In Java, namespaces, in Java, the equivalent is used packages, right? But in Java, packages map to a physical folder location, right? A physical path. Whereas over here, this is a virtual path, right? It's only logical. Right? It's a logical path as opposed to be a physical absolute path, right? The physical file movie can live anywhere. Doesn't matter. You can drop it anywhere you want. Whereas in Java, right, this movie class would have to physically live under a directory called DAO, and that directory needs to live under directory CS5610, right? And that has to be under directory NEU, and that under EDU, right? Kind of like a tyranny of having to, physically organize your file system in a particular way. Anyway, so so it's a logical organization of your code. Anyway, so right, we have a movie. Let's create a couple of attributes here. So they have to be public. Here's a string for the title, setters and getters, and then let's have maybe a plot. Okay, let's keep it simple. Let's just keep these two. In the repeater, what I want to be able to do is instantiate several movies, right? And then give it a collection and give it to the repeater. Hey, repeater, just iterate over this, right? Obviously, the next thing we're going to do is not give it a hard-coded list, right? Will be to go out to the database and retrieve things from the database, right? But first, let's play around with the repeater. Let's create a couple movies. So here's movie. Now this movie, what movie is this? Because I think I already had a movies. edu.neu.cf5610. That DAO. Okay, use that, and that's in there. Use that namespace, and under there's a movie, right? So let's create a movie one, new movie. Oh, we don't have a constructor for this, right? So let's create a constructor that allows me to populate this. So public movie string title and string plot, and then we'll populate title with title, and this plot with plot. So let's in here we're going to populate this with the first movie. Let's go avatar, and the plot is same as Dancing with Wolves. Anybody saw Dancing with Wolves? No, with Kevin Costner. Same plot. Wait, movie. What's this? Repeater. Blah 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 blah. Wait, am I missing something? New movie system. System that string represents the string Unicode. Movie does not contain a constructed text to argument. Really? No, it's confused, huh? Do you want someone to explicitly say which movie? Did I not create the constructor? Movie. Yes, I did. Public movie. String. What are you complaining about? Movie. Is it this one? Oh, I was confused about this one. All right, fine, whatever. Right, so I'm using. I think I have another movie somewhere. Right, it's conflicting. Let me create a couple movies. So movie 2, movie 3, and let's create here maybe Avatar, Terminator, and Terminator. He says, what do we say? What does Terminator say? I'll be back, right? And then you have Aliens. These are all James Cameron movies. Aliens. Anything peculiar that what? Oh, what is it? You can't hear screams in space or something, right? Nobody can hear you when you scream in space. No one can hear you when you scream in space. Right. So let's now create a list of movies. New list of movies. And then I'm gonna. What's it complaining about? Okay. And then I'm gonna add the movies to these, right? So movies.add M1. And let's add all of these. So M1, M2, M3, right? So we have a list of movies. So what we could do now, very much like we did in Angular, right? You can say scope dot movies equal and then some data model, right? Some collection, some array, right? You can do the same thing here. You can get the repeater with the added benefit that this repeater, I don't need any scope, right? The binding is literal, right? We are all part of the same namespace, right? Whatever variable you declare in one, I can see in the other, right? So this repeater, let's call it movie repeater. Movie repeater. In the code behind, I see the movie repeater right there as a variable, right? Declared on the other class, right? Movie repeater. So here's I can say dot, And one of the things that I can say is send the data source. I can say the source of your data, the ones that you're going to iterate over, is this. I can say data source, and I can give it, iterate over this collection, right? In Angular, this would be the end of it, right? There was a change in that model. It kicks off any listener, right? And it goes off and updates the UI, okay? Here you have to do one more step, right? Which you have to bind specifically, right? You have to bind, data bind, right? And this function, explicitly says, go ahead. The data is done, is ready to go, iterate over it, and render it, okay? Angular has something similar, right? It has, I don't know if you've gotten to this. Some of you, I believe some of you have run into this. The apply, the $ apply, or the $ digest, right? It's part of the, it's a loop, right? That's part of the event handling mechanism life cycle in Angular, that you should never have to do this, but sometimes sometimes either because you're using jQuery or you do something outside of Angular, right? That the framework is not aware that something changed and didn't catch the change, so it's not updating, right? So it's out of sync. Now the front end and back end are out of sync, and you have to explicitly say, okay, sync, right? It's very seldom that you have to do that in Angular, right? But you do run into sometimes you have to explicitly say, hey, synchronize the two, right? Well, this is what this is doing. It is explicitly saying, hey, synchronize the data model that you have in the code behind, synchronize it with the front end. Okay. All right, so let's run this. Let's run this. Okay, so it's giving us gibberish, right? And the reason is that it's giving us these three lines, three things, and that's why because we told it, right? This is exactly what I want you to render, right? Once per instance of objects, right? So I could put whatever I want in here, right? So I could for instance put a UL out here, right? And then right before and after the repeater. And then in here, I could put this in a line item, right? And I can refresh that and put that as a bullet, right? And if I open it up, right, it's exactly the HTML that I would expect. Right? It's just a UL, LI. Notice no extra IDs or any extraneous HTML that other components might add here, right? But here is a very clean HTML, right? Something that I could definitely work with on the front end. I can style it any which way I want, right? It's very, very pristine HTML, right? Very clean HTML. Now, what we really want to do here is not put gibberish, but display data about the item, the current item that I'm iterating over, right? Notice that for the first iteration, this will be the instance of Avatar, right? The second one will be Terminator, and the third one will be Aliens, right? So as I iterate over each instance, right, in this scope between the item template, that scope knows the current object of the current iteration, right? It is aware of that object, right? Well, you can access elements in that object. Okay, it is the current context. That object instance is the current context that I'm iterating over, right? And I can extract elements or properties in that instance, right? And through the getters of that instance, right? So notice that all of these title and plot, right, have setters and getters, right? So I can use here the following expression to retrieve the value of a particular attribute in that object, of that current instance, right? I can do eval. It says evaluate, right, the following property of the current instance that I'm iterating over. So I'm going to put title here. Okay? If I iterate now, if I iterate, notice that what I have is LI, avatar, terminator, and aliens. See that? There it is. Okay. So yeah, so I can retrieve values that are stored in my collection, right? In each instance in the collection, right? Let's make this a little better. So this is, say this is span. And let's put the plot here. So this is maybe the plot. Here's the plot. And then if I render this, I'll have the avatar, the title, and the plot, right? I can very easily change the way this is rendering, right? I could, change this to a table, maybe change this to a table row, right? And change these to all TDs and TDs, right? And they can become tables very, very easily, right? And obviously I can always style it any which way I want by adding a couple of CSS frameworks. Right, and then maybe adding a couple of classes here, like we've done throughout the semester, right? Right? Okay. So now I have much better control over the actual HTML that gets rendered, right? Just by using a very, very lightweight component that allows me to iterate over these collections. Everything okay? All right. All right, so that's okay. So we've demonstrated that we can iterate over a collection, right? But I'm not really interested in collections that are hard-coded like we have here, right? I don't want to iterate over this hard-coded list of movies. Instead, what I want to do is be able to retrieve data from a database, right, and map it to the front end, right? We already saw how to do that using the components, right? But I want to introduce something that is much more powerful. You have full control over how the interaction occurs, right? So that instead of using a component, a hard-coded component, we have free reign of how we interact with it. Okay. All right, so let's do that. Let's create here another page. Right. We'll introduce. Let's create another one. Oh, we need to stop. What's this? I'll create here. That's a repeater. So let's do a select. All right, let's do a select. So this is select all movies. Okay. All right. So instead of using the component, right, we're going to use that the same repeater we were using earlier. Actually, let me copy that repeater. Let me copy that repeater from here. I mean, we've done a lot of effort here. Why repeat this whole thing, right? But the thing that I want to change is that the only thing that's going to be different is that instead of repeating over a hard-coded list, right, I'm going to repeat over a dynamic list, right? So I'm just going to copy everything here from starting with a link all the way down through here. I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to put it in select all movies. Paste it. And oops, what happened? I missed this link. Okay. All right. So right now it's not iterating over anything, right? So I'm just gonna call this select all movies, and right now it's not doing anything because the back end code behind is not telling it what the data source is, right? Not telling what it is. So let's go fetch that data source, right, and connect to a database and retrieve data from the database. So let's do that programmatically. And we'll do that here in the code behind. And in the code behind, we're going to we want to, when the page loads, I want to connect to a database, send a select query, right? Retrieve a result set, iterate over that, right? Build my list of movies, right? And then send it to the repeater for rendering. Okay, so let's do that. So to do that, we're going to use a library that is used for interacting with the database, right? It's located in the namespace system data SQL client. Oh wow, read my mind. Right, under the SQL client, this declares quite a few interfaces and classes that allow you to interact with the database. Okay, one of them is the SQL connection, right? That allows you to open up a live connection to a database and start interacting with the connection. Very, very similar to Java's connection, right, in JDBC. Right, very, very similar. Right? These guys, they copy from each other all the time, right? And we get the benefit from, each one trying to outdo the other, right? But Microsoft has been at it for quite longer time, right? Anyway, so let's create a connection, a new SQL connection. Now, for the SQL connection, we need to give it the URL. I'm sorry, the connection string that we want to use to connect to the database. And for that, we can retrieve that from the database connection string that we were using. So we have several schemas here that we can connect to, right? But let's connect to this one. So if you, one of the ways, well, there's two basic ways. One of them is you can hard code the connection string right in your code, or you can have a separate configuration file where you can name these connection strings and give it a particular name, right? And then use that name inside of your code, right? So first, let's use this technique, right, of just hard coding the connection string. So let's do that. If you do the properties on that schema, or if you do the properties, you'll notice that this is the connection string, right? You need to be able to connect to it, right? This usually, it also includes things such as username and passwords and things like that. Any credentials. That's why sometimes it's not considered a good practice to use this string at all, right? Because it carries with it quite a few private information, sensitive information, and you can always change the username or password or change the string. Also makes you very dependent on being able to connect just to this database. Right? If you need to move the database or make changes to the schema or make changes, you would need to recompile your code, right? Anyway, so let's do this quick and dirty way, right? Let's see. Here's a connection string. And I'm going to paste the connection string right here. And notice that it's complaining about something, and it's complaining about this backslash, right? Backslash usually is for escape sequences, right? We could escape it here, right? Or we could say, well, this is a very special string, right? This is a very special string. Interpret this the right way. Right, interpret it the way that it's really meant to be interpreted. Right, it's part of some kind of path. Right, don't interpret it like an escape sequence or the way a normal string would be interpreted. Okay, or we could just escape it instead of using the @ symbol. Anyway, so we have a connection. We're not yet connected. We have to explicitly connect. We have to say connection open. Now we're connected. Right, now we're connected. And before I forget, I'm going to close it. Right? I don't want to be that developer that other developers start complaining about that you don't close your connections, right? If it's just you on your database, in your own database, in your local system, it might not matter whether you close your connections or not. These connections will eventually time out. If you leave them open, they'll time out and close themselves. But if you're in a development environment with other developers, right? Using the same database, and you keep opening and opening and opening, never release them, right? Eventually, the database is going to run out, and some developer is going to complain, I can't connect. Someone's not closing their connections, right? Don't be that developer. Close your connections, right? All right, so let's now that we're open, we can start communicating with the database. One of the things that we need to do is we want to send a select statement, to retrieve data from the database, right? For that, we need a command. We need a SQL command. So let's create a SQL command. So here's a I'll call it find or read all movies. This is a command CMD. And we create this object from the connection. Say create command. Now that we have the command, we need to tell it, all right, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to insert, delete, update? What do what command am I? Right? For that, we are going to give it the actual text, the actual SQL statement that I want to execute against the database, right? So we want to select star from movie. Okay, so that's the command that I want to send. Something that I would type at a SQL script, right, to be able to retrieve data, right? So there it is. I have the command, and now I'm ready to actually execute it. I'm ready to go ahead, connect to the database and execute. So we're going to do read command, and we'll do execute. Now execute has a couple of things here that you can do, right? The two of the ones that we're going to be using today are these two: non-query and reader. Reader is, like the name suggests, if it's a query that returns something, right? Returns some kind of result set, right? A list of rows, things like that, right? Whereas non-query is kind of like everything else, right? Either select, retrieves data, whereas the other ones are all updates, right? Update, delete, insert. They all modify the data, as opposed to select, which is just read only, right? It's only reading. So right now we're doing a reader. We are reading. So this is going to return to us a result set, a data set that we can iterate over. Each data point represents a row in the database, right? So this returns SQL data reader. There it is. Returns SQL data reader. So let's declare that over here. So SQL data reader. So reader. And this reader is what's going to allow us to iterate over the collection. Sorry, the row set that's coming back, right? And it reads. It doesn't read them all into memory. Okay, it reads them, maybe 10, 20, 100 at a time. Right? You can establish what the page size is and how many of these to fetch. But obviously, we don't want to read all of them, right? Because we could have thousands of records, right? And we would not have enough RAM to represent all the records in disk, to represent them all at once, right, in memory. Instead, reader allows us to go one at a time, right? But it does some pre-fetching. It says, well, I'll fetch the next 10 rows, right? And then I'll let you iterate, and as you consume those rows, I'll fetch another 20, 30 rows, right, as you consume them. And then you do whatever you want, right? What we're going to do is we're going to instantiate our own data model, right, in memory that represents the list of movies. So the way to know whether, eventually there will be no more rows, right? I'll start the first row. Actually, I start before the first row, right, and I go all the way through after the last row. And the way I know that I'm done is that reader. Every time you read, right, it returns true or false and saying whether there is a row to read or not, right? So we can use that API. We can say reader.read. Right? If it returns true, it means that you have just read a row. Okay. If it returns false, then it says, oh, that's it. There's nothing else to read. No, I'm done, right? So in here, once it reads, what it does is it creates a map. Right, it creates a map of all the fields in each one of the rows, right, with the values of each one of those in the record, right? So, for instance, if I want to retrieve the title, I can say reader title, right? If I want to retrieve the plot, right, I can say reader plot. Right, so that retrieves for me the values of each one of the elements in the row. What I want to do with each one of these, I want to populate an instance of an object, right? I'm going to say movie, new movie. It's what is it? edu.neu. Movie. Yeah, that one. And so I want to populate and say, well, the title, I would say the title is going to be this, dot title, going to be that, and the plot, movie plot is going to be that. Now, reader, notice that it's still complaining, right? So because what happens is that the reader can read a whole bunch of data types, right? You can read dates, you can read integers, floats, varchars, anything. So it returns a generic object, and you need to cast it to the right data type. So we're going to do, cast all these to strings. Right. So now we have the movie populated. At some point, we need to put it in a collection, right? That we're going to use then to populate the repeater, right? So let's create that collection. Let's create it up here and say the list of new movies, new list of movie. Right, so I'm going to create a list of these things, and I'm gonna add each movie that I instantiate. I'm going to add it to my collection. Add the movie. Okay. All right. So yeah. So we've read. Hopefully, we've read all the movies from the database. It's only 3. Notice I'm not considering pagination. Right. Typically, if I want to paginate, I would need to limit my how many rows I want to read at a time. Maybe 10. Right. So only read 10, and then if they say next, read another 10, and so on and so forth, right? We're not dealing with any of that here. Okay. So what's left over is to send this data now to the collection, right? To the repeater, right? So we have the repeater. I believe we still call it movie repeater. There it is, movie repeater. Oops, no. Movie repeater. There it is. I'm going to say that the data source is this movies, and I'm going to bind data bind. Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's run this. What is it? This one. Let's refresh. Let's see if this blows up. Oh, it did blow up. Invalid object name movie. Movie sequence section movie. Select start from. Oh wait, do we have that table? Oh, we don't have the movie table. We never created the movie table. Let's create the movie table. New table. So movie, here's movie, and I'm going to have this be an identity. So I don't want to deal with the unique IDs, right? So the database will select those for me. And I want title, varchar, 5, null, and plot, the same thing. Okay. I'm going to update. So I'm going to send this to the database, update database. And what else? I think that's it. Oh, we have this ID. We never dealt with ID, huh? How about we update our class to deal with IDs? Let's add ID here. Public string ID set get, and I'm going to overload my constructor to accept an ID. Okay, and in my as I am reading, right, not only am I going to read the title and the plot, I'm also going to read the ID, but this ID is of type integer, right? So I need to cast this as an integer. Okay, pretty good. My page, I might want to put the ID as well. See what the ID renders as ID. All right, let's try this. Let's try this a second time. Let's see. Let's render. Implicitly convert int to a string. What happened? Integer. Did I not declare as an integer? In the database? I did declare as an integer. Integer. Movie is an integer. Integer. Oh, I hate computers. Int. Okay, there it is. All right. Okay. So no data. Okay. At least it didn't blow up. But okay, we don't have any data in the table. So let's add some data to our table. So here's let me refresh, and here's movie. Get the data table, and let's create a couple movies here. So here's Titanic. Plot is it sinks at the end, right? So there's one insert. If I refresh, there it is, right? So anything I insert in the database, it gets inserted, right? Any other movies? The Abyss. Anybody watch The Abyss? From James Cameron? No? So some aliens at the bottom of the sea. Anyway, if I refresh, I see the everything here. Make sense? All right, so we did select all movies. How about insert? Let's do insert now. Okay. Let me do an add here, right? A new item, and let's do an insert. Let's do an insert or create new movie. Create new movie. In the create new movie, I'm going to copy some of the same code that I already worked on in the previous code, right? So I don't have to repeat that. So for instance, I'm going to copy the iterator. I'm going to copy the iterator, the repeater. So I'm going to start from here. And I'm just going to copy that into the new movie. There we go. So I'm going to copy in here. I'm just going to change the title. I'm going to put here, create new movie. There we go. What else am I going to copy? I'm going to copy also the page load, okay? So that it fetches all the movies, right? And it populates my repeater. Yes? I'm going to copy that from here. So I'm going to copy the page load so that it looks exactly the same. And I'm going to paste it into create here. Paste it in here. There we go. So create new movie should work exactly the same way as my select all movies. Yes? I'm going to run that. Just the title should have changed. Oops. What's the matter here? SQL connection. Oh, we never imported those, right? Yeah, it can't find any of these because we didn't import the correct namespace. So using, what is it? System.data.SQL client. There we go. Let's try it again. And let's run it again. Create new movie. Let's run. Okay, so retrieving those two movies. So let's add here the ability of creating a new movie. All right, so let's normally what we would do is going to the table, maybe create a table head, right? And in here a table row, and maybe a table H, maybe for the title, and then for the plot. Very much what we were doing for the when we're doing this on Angular, right? Very, very similar. Actually, one of them is the ID. The first one is ID, right? And the last one is going to be a button, right? So this is, now what button is this going to be? Actually, no, this is the first one, right? So it's just headings, just a heading. So yeah, no buttons here. And the next one is a heading, right? So there's no non-breaking space. Let's see what this renders. It just has at the top, right? So underneath that, we're going to get another row with a form. So this is a table row with table data. And in here, we're going to put an input field. So, but it's not going to be a regular input field. We want to be able to read that from the controller, right? And to be able to read that from the controller, we're going to use a an ASP. One of the elements that we used last week, right, for the text box to be able to type in the title of the movie, right? And once I add it here, I'll be able to see it in the controller. I'll be able to grab the values, right, that are declared here in the front end. I'll be able to grab it from the controller in the back. So this will be well, no, the first one is what? The first one is just the ID, right? The ID, and we don't want to type that. So this is non-breaking space for the ID, right? The second one is the title. So I'm going to call this the title box. Okay, and then I'm gonna paint this a little bit. I'm going to say that this is CSS of this will be a form control. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing for each one of the fields. So we have text box and now plot, right? And I'll call this plot box, right? And the last one, I want a button, right? If I click on that, I'll push. It'll be a create. Yes, it'll be an insert. So TD ASP button ID. I'll call this. Create button, run at server, and CSS will be button primary. And if I click on this, I want to create a new event handler. Okay. So notice that the event handler, notice where it was created. See that the asterisk over here? Okay, what happened is that it wrote that event handler in the code behind, right? There it is, okay? But notice that there's an asterisk, so it did not save it. It did not save it, okay? So you have to remember to save it. I often forget to save it. I create all these event handlers. I run the page and it says, oh, I don't see that event handler. Right? It's because it added the event handler, but it did not save it. Okay, so what do we want to do here? What we want to do is, again, connect to a database, right? Do an insert, right? We want to grab all the data from the form, right? Let's see what we have so far. Create a new movie. Let's refresh this. Notice that we have the form. Oh, we don't have any text for the button. Let's change that real quick. So here's a button. Let's add a text. Create. Okay, there it is, right? So what we're going to do is grab from the front end. We're going to grab the title, right? So string title will be what? Will be grab from the title box, the text, right? And then the plot title will be plot box, right? Dot text, right? Okay, now we have the two. What we want to do is, again, connect to a database, right? Get a connection, whatnot, right? So let's do that. SQL connection, new SQL connection. And I need the query string, and I think I have it somewhere up here. Somewhere up here, I believe I have that. There it is. I'm just going to copy that. Right? That's what I do. Now that I have the connection, I'm going to open and not forget to close it. Once I open and close, now I can start communicating with it. I need a command, so let's create a SQL command. And I want to do create movie. right? Create movie SQL or command. So this will be connection dot create command. Now I have the command. I'm going to put the SQL create movie command dot text, and that's going to be what? It's going to be, you know, again, insert into movie, the fields, title, and plot, and the values are going to be placeholders, right? It'll be a title placeholder and a plot. Or I could have done this, right? The hard code, I could say title, right? Comma, right? And then plot. Yes, you could have done that, right? But that's not a good idea, right? Well, this makes us vulnerable to SQL injection, right? Somebody could, you know, type malicious text in there, right, and start screwing around with our database, right? You know, to deal with this, you would use, you know, like a prepared statement, right? Which we haven't looked at prepared statements. Prepared statements allow you to look at the data type that I'm expecting. You know, for instance, title is expecting a string, or ID is expecting an integer, or if I'm expecting a date, or I'm expecting, you know, any particular data type. And, you know, prepared statement allow you to look at the data that you're giving it, right, and compare it against the data type that it's expecting, right? So and it also verifies for, you know, any special characters, and so that it makes you less vulnerable to SQL injection, right? So anyway, so a better solution might be to use what we were doing earlier. We would use placeholders. So this would be title and plot. And, all right. So now that we have the placeholders, we need to configure those placeholders, right? We need to actually do our own injection, right? Inject values to title and plot. Okay. So let's do that. We'll inject. We want to inject this value, right, to the title placeholder, and this plot for the plot placeholder. Yes. All right. So let's do that. We'll create a parameter. We say we're going to grab all the parameters that we have in the command. Parameters. Here are the parameters. So these are all the parameters, which right now we don't have any parameters. Okay. I'm going to add a parameter, new SQL parameter, called title, and I want the value to inject for that parameter. I want the string title to inject to that. Right. Same thing for plot. I want to inject. Okay. All right, so now I've configured my text that I want to execute, and now I'm ready to execute. All right, so let's execute, and we're going to say create movie command dot execute. Now this does not return a query. Right? This is an update, right? Just like update, delete, and insert, they all update the database. So we do an execute non-query. Right? So hopefully that inserts into the database. And then it closes the database. All right, so let's see if this works. Okay, so let's put some gibberish here. So create, and didn't work. Wait a minute. It did go. All right, so it did insert, right? But what happened is that the page load occurred first, right, and then the insert, right? We'll fix that in a minute. But notice what we're doing here. We are, you know, as we said earlier, right? This code, any code that you put in here is non-reusable, right? So all this algorithm that we've been putting in here, right, of connecting to a database and all this stuff, right, can only be used in this page, right? And this is considered to be bad practice. Instead, what we want to be able to do is, you know, grab all this, right? Grab all this algorithm that we have here, put it in a dedicated module, right? A dedicated reusable set of classes, or a class or set of classes, right? That are dedicated to the task of interacting with the database. Right? So let's do that. Let's refactor, right? Let's refactor this to use this design pattern called the data access object pattern, right? Where we have dedicated classes for the interaction with the database, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to grab all this. We're going to grab all this, right? And move this into a dedicated class or set of classes, right? Typically, the easiest way to implement is that I'm going to have one DAO, one data access object per table, okay? Or that's the simplest one, right? Or if you have several tables that are related to one another, with a parent-child relationship, right? You might have a DAO for the parent, right? That is also responsible for managing the children, okay? That is responsible for creating, inserting and updating not only the parent, but maybe also the children, right? And so that when it loads the parent, it might also load its children as a collection of its parent, right? All right, so let's do that. So let's create under here. Let's refactor this. Right? Let's put under CS5610, right? Under here, I'm going to say I'm going to create another class. I'll call it the movie DAO. Okay. Following the naming convention that if my data model is called movie, right, it usually maps to a table also called movie, right, and maps to a DAO also called movie DAO, right? It keeps everything straight, what maps to everything, right? Sometimes it's not possible, right, because sometimes you might be working with a database that already exists, right, and that database has been there forever, right? It's a legacy database, right? And that database might have been following a different naming convention, right? Maybe using underscores, right? Or abbreviated names, okay? But don't let that deter you from using good naming convention in the object data model, right? There's one thing is the relational data model, which has its own limitations, right? And then there's the object data model. It is your responsibility to map them and synchronize them, but it is your responsibility to make sure that you also have a good object model, regardless of what the relational model might be. All right, so our movie DAO, what we're going to do in here, I'm going to put this in a namespace. I'm going to put it namespace edu.neu.cs and DAO. Okay, and what we want to be able to do here is declare here all the various operations that we typically would want to do, right? And typically there's 4 or 5 very well-defined operations, right? Standard operations that we want to do provide at least those 5 operations. You can go beyond, right, and create your own many more, but at least these 5 operations, right? They're usually referred to as the CRUD operations. Okay, I like to say the CRUD operation. Right? It's 2 R's, 2 reads, and the acronym stands for create, read, and there's 2 types of read. You read one, right, for a given ID, or you read all, right, and then you can extend and say, well, I can give you an ID, and you return to me the one that maps to this ID, or I can read by something else, maybe by title, okay, or by year that it was like the movie came out, right? I could filter about anything, but there's 2 reads, right? One is read by ID, the other one is read all, the other one is update, and the other one is delete. So these are the the 5 standard operations to which you can add more, right? So let's now we already wrote code for creation, right? And we already wrote code for read all, right? So let's go into our code and grab that. Let's see. In page load, we were doing this retrieval, right, of all the movies, right? So let's do that. Let's grab this. Let's grab this code, right? And I want to. It's gonna. I'm going to grab that, copy that, and I'm going to move it over here. And so create. This is going to be a method, right? It's going to be a public method. It's going to read all the movies, and it's going to return to us what? A list of movies, right? So this is a list, right, of edu.neu movie, right? It's going to return one of those. So actually, sorry, it's going to create a movie, and then what's going to return? The movie it just created. What do you want to do? Well, as a convenience, right? Typically, what it would do is just return the movie it just created, right? But as a convenience, I'm going to go a little further and says, okay, you're going to create, right? And as a convenience, return to me, because usually after you create, what do? You want to list the movies, including the one you just created, right? So as a convenience, I'm going to return the list of movies. Here, create. So create. Here's create movie. So there's a couple of things that we could do here. I can provide the arguments to create the new movie, like this, right? The title and the plot, or I can pass you an object, right, that contains all the values that I want, that I need, right? And this is, again, this is you movie, the movie that I want you to create, right? So it is more of an object-oriented way of doing it, right? I give you something that has already the attributes. And in here, I'm going to paste here. Oh, did I copy it in the wrong place? Oh, this is get all. I'm sorry. Because why is he doing that? Sorry. Here, where's it create? Where is it? There it is, right? It's this over here. Here's a create. There it is. I create it. Notice that it doesn't find SQL connection. So I'm going to have to import that. So using system.data.SQL file. Okay, so I found those. So here's create. Now it's complaining that, let's see, the title, right? Where were we getting the title from? We were getting it from the text field, right? Right now, what we have it is actually on the movie. It was being passed to us as an instance, right? So I'm going to read that from here, movie.title and movie.plot. It's being passed to us as an argument in the movie. Okay? All right? And finally, notice that we said that what we would do is return the list, right? And I know who does that already very well, the read all, which we haven't written yet, right? So after I close, I'm going to say return read all movies, okay, which we haven't written yet. So let's write return all movies. So here's return all movies, read all movies. It's going to be a public. It's a public. Let's say public is going to return an edu.new movie. So read all movies. Sometimes these methods, instead of read, oftentimes they are called finder methods, right? So instead of read all movies, you might see find all movies, right? As in, I am doing a select statement. You know, I have a where clause, right? And that where clause is filtering out. You know, it's looking through. You know, it's iterating over my entire database, my entire collection, looking for the things that match, right? So it's kind of like you're finding, right? You're searching. So yes, naming convention, right? If this were Java class, I would typically use the finder naming convention, but here I'm using read. All right, so read. So over here we have code for that, don't we? Let's see, we have it here somewhere. There it is, right? And it returns the data bind right here. It goes here. We paste it here, and not to forget to close the connection. There we go. So we have the list. The list is here. Wait, what happened to the list? Did I not copy the list? Oh, I didn't copy the list. There it is. That's the list. And finally, what we do is we return the list, right? We return movies. Okay. All right. So what we've done is that we have refactored. Well, actually, sorry. What we've done is that we have taken the implementation and now made it modular and something that can be reused, right? So let's refactor our versions of the pages and so that they use this DAO instead. Okay. So let's look at the pages we were working on. So here's create new movies, right? We're going to refactor that. We're going to say I'm going to leave that one as is. I'm going to create a brand new one. I'm going to say add new item. So this is let's see, select and create with DAO. Okay, and what I am going to copy, I am going to copy the front end. Right, I'm not going to waste time, rewriting that. Right? So I'm going to go here. I'm going to grab here. I'm just going to go all the way down, and I'm going to put it in my ASPX. There it is. Paste. It's the same repeater, same text area, text fields to type in my input, same thing, right? But in the back end, okay, I'm still gonna need that event handler. I don't have the event handler, do I? Where's the button? Where is my button? There's my button. Right, I'm gonna remove the on click so that it'll re-render that click event. So I'm on click, oops, equal, and I'm gonna regenerate the event. There it is, right? So before, remember we did the SQL right here, right? We did all the SQL here for the select, and we did another SQL for the insert, right? And so instead, what we're going to do here is use the DAO instead, right? So let's use the DAO, which is in movie DAO. There it is. So DAO, new DAO. Now I have the DAO. For the page load, what are we doing? We want to grab the list, right, of all movies. But instead of doing the query, we're going to use the DAO, right? So we're going to have DAO.read all movies. There it is. And we're going to put it here, movies. Actually, we can right away go to the repeater. What was it called? Movie repeater. And say, hey, that's your data source. Right? The collection that is the DAO is going to fetch, that is already the data source that you're going to iterate over, right? And then bind movie repeater. Notice how, from the point of view of the front end, right? The only thing that the front end is doing, okay, is connecting, right, the front end and the data that is how is that data being retrieved, right? Or what is the logic behind that? That escapes the interest of the controller. Okay, it's specifically only for managing gestures or interactions, specifically for interacting with the page, right? Nothing that would otherwise be useful anywhere else other than this page. Okay, so the click button, right? What do we do here? We want to get a hold of we want to create that new movie, right? So we want to do DAO.create movie. Create movies expecting what? An instance of a movie, right? So we have to create that movie. So here's movie. I'm going to create it. I'm going to say edu movie And I'm going to put in as title, I'm going to grab it from the title box, right? So title box text and movie plot, movie plot box text. Right? And then I'm going to pass the movie. And what is the movie going to return? A list, right? The list of elements, right? Which I am going to send to the repeater for re-rendering. Okay. So let's run this guy. Let's run this guy. There's the ASPX. Come on. All right, there it is. So let's create a dummy movie, and there it is. Right, it's added. Right, make sense? Okay. All right. So if ever I want to say I want to add functionality to this page, and I want it to be able to delete now, right? Now the way you would do this is that as you're iterating, or maybe you want to do anything, you would be tempted to write the SQL in the code behind, right? Please resist that temptation. Okay. Instead, put it, not in the code behind, right? Where it's you can't reuse it. You can't take things from if you write really good code in there, there's no way to reuse it, right? So instead, put it outside and where it can be reused. So let's extend this, and let's say as it's iterating, I want to go to a details page. Right, let's go to a details page, like we've done in previous examples. So let's add here. Let's add here PD, and then a hyperlink that is going to go to the details page.aspx, which doesn't exist yet. And I'm going to pass as an argument the ID, right? The ID of the movie. So we'll call this movie details. So movie details. And here we'll say I'll pass the movie ID. Right? And as an argument, the value, where's the value of that ID? There it is. It's right here, right? I can pass it along. I'll render it right here. Right? And I'll call this details. And I'm going to pass in the CSS, the class, sorry. Oops, class. I want to render this as a button and success. Okay. So if I render this now, I have the details, right? If I click on it, notice that I don't have that page yet, right? And hopefully at the end I have the ID of the movie I just clicked. If I click on this one, the movie ID will be 2, and so on and so forth, right? So I am passing the ID. I'm going to create that page. Say DAO, add ASPX. And I have the code. There it is. Okay. So the movie details. Let me copy some of this. I'll copy the link and the container so that we will have it here as well. There it is. Okay. So it renders nicely with the bootstrap. So here we'll say here H1 movie details. Okay. And maybe what I want to do here is put a label. Right? Maybe put a label ASP:label of, and I'll call this ID. I want to render the name of the movie that I'm showing the details for, right? So I'll call this movie, I'll call it title label. Okay, and this is run at server. Here we go. And then here, I like to display here, I don't know, the let's see, I want to display here maybe using Angular's, Bootstrap's forms. Let's see, we can go components, and we can go to forms. Where are the forms? Forms. Not so small. Where are my forms? Oh, maybe they're not here. CSS? Forms, there they are. All right, so let me grab some there we go. Okay. So I'm going to paste it here. The details, form, there we go, form. And we'll close this form. All right, so, I can't have a form, can I? Because I already have a form outside. That's okay. I'll just move that. There we go, form group. Here's a label, and the label is going to be, let's see, we'll call it what? We'll call it movie title label, or just movie table, sorry, movie title. The type here is just text. The email, this would be movie title. Instead of an input field, actually, what do I need? An actual ASPX, right, text box. So ASPX text box, right? The ID, I'm going to use the same ID for this, right? Movie title. And this is run at server. And the CSS will be form control. Okay. Let's render this. Let's now if we go, before it was not there, but if I render it, again, there it is, movie title. Okay? Right. And let me just copy this a couple more times. This would be for plot. And this would be movie plot. And the ID would be, movie plot. Okay. And the text box, probably I want a text area, so not enough space, for me to render this, right? So so this will be text mode. I'll say that I want multi-line. Right? So if I render this, now I have a big area where I can write my plot. Okay. Notice that how instead of the movie details kind of like forced you to think in that particular way, right? Over here we're not. We can go back to our unrestricted, right, ad hoc, build your app page with regular HTML, right, and regular components that you want to add. We're going to use DAO to retrieve the data and then feed that data into the front end. Okay, right? All right. What else? Let's see. All right. We don't have a title, right? Let's go now to the back end. Movie details. And how can we retrieve the data? We can retrieve it. We have the ID, don't we? We have the ID from the URL. So we can do that. We can say string movie ID. We can retrieve that from the request from movie ID. ID. And what I would like to be able to do is retrieve, again, I need to, it's very, very tempting to start typing, SQL connection, right? And do all your SQL here, okay? Again, resist that temptation, right? Instead, you can say, oh, I wish my DAO would do something like this, right? Where if I have the ID, if I give the ID to the DAO, it would come back to me with an object of a movie, right? Once I have this movie, then I can go on and populate my front end, right? So I could say, I wish I had something like this. Movie is equal to my DAO. I don't have the DAO, so let me instantiate the DAO. So movie, this would be u dot u DAO. So DAO new movie DAO, and this too, right? This would be u movie. So I'd like to go to DAO and say, hey, DAO, why don't you read a movie by ID if I give you an ID, right? I'll give you an ID, and you'll fetch for me that movie. Notice that we don't have it, right? We don't have that. So we need that ID. So for that ID, I'm going to parse that movie ID. So int ID convert to integer 32 movie ID. There it is. So I have the ID. I'm gonna convert it, and now I have that. Will this automatically create the generate method stuff? Oh, it does. Okay. All right. So in the movie ID, there it is. Right. I've created the stub for that. There it is. Read movie ID. See that? Okay. Right, so we're gonna do SQL in here. So SQL connect, it's all up here, right? So let me just copy that from here. Right, so this would be, it's one of the CRUD operations, isn't it? One that we had not, this one, read by ID, right? We hadn't written that, right? So let me paste it in there. Connection, yada, yada, yada. Let me make sure I close the connection before I forget. The command is read, I'll call it the same name. And this is, oh, you can't have the same name? So this is command. So I create the command. The text is going to be read movie by ID. Movie by ID command. Text will be select star from movie where is equal ID. I'm going to pass it. So now I have the ID, right? I'm going to populate that. So I'm going to get the command read movie by ID command dot parameters dot add a new SQL parameter for that placeholder ID, and I'm going to give it the value ID. Okay, and finally I'm going to execute. I'm going to say read movie cmd dot execute. I am reading this time. I am reading, and this returns to me a reader. So a SQL reader. What is it? SQL data reader. But notice the ID is primary key, so it's unique. So I know it's only going to be one, right? And maybe not even, right? If the ID doesn't exist, right? So what we're going to do is, instead of a while loop iterating over this, I know there's only one record, at most one record, right? So I'm going to ask, instead of iterating over the reader, I'm going to say if reader, right? Read. So this will immediately tell me whether there is a record or not, right? If there is no record, that movie never existed, right? But if there's a record, it is the only record, right? So there's no need to iterate over this. So I say if Now I have the title. I'm going to create the new movie. So this would be EDU movie new. Is it using the correct one? I did. I thought I did, but it wasn't thinking it for some reason. Where? Where? Yeah, no, okay. I thought, yeah, because I was using the namespace, it would know which one I was talking about, but they're both in the same namespace. Yeah, so I thought I was going to use the correct one, but for some reason it's not. Okay, so movie, I'm going to put the title. Right? The title will be reader title. Movie dot plot is going to be reader plot. Right, and also the ID. I'm going to reading the ID as well. I'm copying everything from the relational model to the object model. Right, I'm mapping this. Next week we'll see that we can automate a lot of this. Right, using ORMs like Entity Framework does all this copying back and forth, right, between records and the object model, so that we don't have to do this manually. Right. Notice that this is very error prone. So this is string, right? String, and this is an integer. Oh, no, wait. And this is ID, right? ID. Okay, I have the object, and I'm going to return now the object. Oh, wait, where did I instantiate the object? I instantiated it here. I need to instantiate it outside of the if statement, right? Instantiate it here. Oops. What am I doing? Okay, there's the movie. And then I return the movie after closing. Return movie. And in the front end, finally, now that I have the movie, I can say title box. So title label, the text is my movie dot title. Title box. Wait, what happened to? Oh, wait, what? They call movie title. Movie title, and movie. What else? Plot. There it is. Dot text equal movie dot plot. Right. So if I go here and I refresh, hopefully it won't blow up. Oh. Semicolon. Where did I miss a semicolon? Line 10. Where? Oh, semicolon. There it is, right? It retrieved the correct movie, the Abyss, or if I click on Titanic, I get Titanic, it syncs, right? In each one of these. See that? All right, we'll come back. We'll continue on Friday. All right, thank you.